Okay. Okie pokey. Howdy, howdy. We are back. Uh, Back in black. Back in green. What? Oh, yeah, ha ha. My name is Black. Back as Black? Okay, whatever. Ha ha. Um, this is the quality content that you come here for. Anyway, sorry I keep looking off to the side. We have a new kitten, but she is vanished somewhere in the room, and I'm curious where she is. Um, yeah, she's probably asleep somewhere, so that's fine. But anyway, quality content. Today, this video is going to be talking about reading number 3, The Defense of Socrates, aka The Apology. Um, and we'll get into that, sort of why it's called that, and what it is doing, and why we care about it. Um, so anyway, The Defense of Socrates is a work written by the philosopher Plato in the early 4th century BCE. Um, Plato wrote a lot about his teacher, Socrates. Socrates never wrote anything himself, but he was extremely influential as a teacher and sort of considered the founder of Western philosophy. And Plato, who was arguably Socrates' greatest student, wrote a lot of stuff, dialogues, which is to say, fictionalized accounts of Socrates talking to somebody and wrestling with some philosophical concept. He wrote a lot of dialogues that feature Socrates as a main character. Um, the apology is not really technically a dialogue. There are some dialogic elements to it, but it's not technically a dialogue. It is, the best way to put it would be to say it's a dramatization, if you will, of the actual trial of Socrates, which took place in 399 BCE. Um, and so it is an account of an actual historical event, an event we know happened because we have other records of it. Is it fiction or non-fiction? Yes. Unhelpful. Um, Aristotle, who was a student of Plato, so Socrates taught Plato and Plato taught Aristotle. Aristotle considered it fiction, or at least close enough to fiction, even though he was well aware that the trial actually did take place and the broad outlines of the trial are accurately represented. He still considered the piece sufficiently dramatized that it was essentially fiction. Other people have disagreed and have said that in the rough details, it's essentially true. It's just not. It's just not maybe an accurate, a perfectly accurate account of everything everyone said. So maybe you can classify it as historical fiction or fictionalized history. I don't know. Either way, it's not straightforwardly fiction or history. A little bit both. Um, the title that it was most commonly known as when I was in undergrad was The Apology. It is now frequently referred to as The Defense of Socrates. The Apology is the Greek title for it. And for those of you who have read it, you might say, why is it called The Apology? This sucker doesn't apologize for anything. The reason, of course, I say of course, sorry. The reason, let me tell you, is that the title, the apology rendered in English, derives from the Greek word apologia, which just means a defense. So the original Greek word that we get the word apology from, apologia, is sort of the opposite of the way we use the word in English now. An apologia would have been a defense, an explanation. So, like, if you're mad at me because I didn't pick you up from the mall on time, and I pull up an hour late, and you're like, "What do you have to say to yourself?" And I'm like, I am so sorry, but let me explain. There was a huge car accident. Um, and I was a witness because I was right behind it when it happened, and I had to stop until they cleared it out of the road, and the police wanted to talk to me, and like what I'm offering there, I am sorry. I hate that I kept you waiting for an hour, but what I'm offering there is a defense of my actions. I'm saying, hey, it wasn't my fault. This is what happened, and you can't really blame me. So it's a defense of my actions. That is, in the classical Greek sense, an apologia. Um, so the title makes more sense in the context of what Plato does in the apology when he's put on trial. He doesn't just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, my bad." He doesn't offer an apology in the English use of the word. He offers an apologia in the Greek use of the word, which is to say, he explains, he's like, yeah, I did do the things you're saying I did, but I had a good reason for doing them, and here's what they are, and here's why you should find me innocent. So, that is an apologia, a defense of his actions. So, a lot of people now call it the defense of Socrates, um, even though the original title, as it was written, is the Apologia, which is often more accurately rendered as the Apology. Okay, so the Apology or the Defense of Socrates. The reading that you have is, I don't think, the complete text of the Apology. I might be misremembering that, but I don't think it is. Um, the complete text, though, is pretty easy to find. It is a 2,400-year-old document, so it's not like it's under copyright. You can just Google the Apology by Plato, and at the top or pretty near the top should be the full text of it in the Internet Archive or Project Gutenberg or something like that. So if you want to read the full thing, you can very easily. I recommend that you do. Even the full text of it is not super long. And I definitely think it's worth reading. But the reading I gave you gets the important points down, and we should, we can work with that. Um, I'm not going to walk you through the reading, as is my, my policy is you should have this down by now. I don't walk through the readings bit by bit by bit generally. What I do is sort of talk about the reading in a thematic fashion, and so I'm going to explain sort of what was going on and give you the context of it and why we care about it. Um, let's see here. What else do I need to say in prefatory remarks? Okay. Well, I think that's all, and we can dig into it. So, as I said, this is an account of something that actually happened. Socrates, considered the founder of Western philosophy, lived in Athens, which was in sort of a golden age era at the time, you might say. Philosophically, things were getting hopping, if you will. Um, and that's because of Socrates. Um, he's making it happen. He's out there teaching people. Now, I've gone over in my videos of what is philosophy and why I study philosophy. I've talked about the nature of philosophy so that you might understand what Socrates was doing. But the short version of it is Socrates was asking hard questions. And he was asking those hard questions of very public figures, like politicians in the city. He would ask them in public, he would ask them questions that maybe they didn't want to answer. Like if a politician is up there making a speech and saying, "This is good for Athens," he might say, "When you say it's good for Athens, what do you mean? Is it good for everyone in Athens? Is it good for important people in Athens? Is it good for just the rich people in Athens? What do you mean when you say this is good for Athens? Um, when you say this is good, what do you consider good? Does it make us all richer? Does it improve us as human beings? Does it make us safer? Um, does it make us prettier? What do you mean by this is good for Athens? He was pressing people on the difficult questions, and this annoyed a lot of people. Um, he had a group of admirers, young people who wanted to learn how to do philosophy, which is, in other words, how to ask the hard questions, how to make the fine distinctions in concepts, how to analyze arguments, and discern arguments critically. He had a passel, a gaggle, a flock, um, a clouder, a pride of students, if you will. Um, Sorry, I got in some pretty obscure collective nouns there. Does anyone know what a clouder is the collective noun for? Alright, sorry. I can't hear you. No, I'm kidding.
The collective noun for students is class, batch, assembly, flock, congregation, or council.
Interesting. Okay. I was just given, Morgan just gave me the collective nouns for students. A batch of students. A class of students. A flock?
Flock.
A flock of students. I like that. Actually, I'm referring you all as, from now on, you're my flock. A flock of students. I'm enjoying that. Clouder. Clowdwer. A clouder. You should look it up. Anyway. Um, where was I? Oh, right. Clouder. No, I'm kidding. He had a bunch of students who wanted to learn from him. And so, basically, that was also annoying to the powers that be. They did not like the idea that soon there would be a bunch of little Socrateses. There'd be a bunch of little Socrateses running around. That would be the Greek pluralization. Uh, so yeah, Socrateses running around. They didn't want that. So what happens is Socrates gets accused of two crimes: impiety, which is to say not honoring the gods, and corrupting the youth. Now, the charge of impiety came from Socrates the questioning the nature and the purpose of the public religion, and also questioning the nature of the gods. He was not, strictly speaking, an atheist. He didn't say there were no gods. He just wasn't sure that they were exactly the way that they were portrayed in the myths. And he also wondered if the public religion, that is, the way that the state religion of Athens was practiced, he was wondering if that was really a good thing. So he was accused of impiety, of not properly honoring the gods, and he was accused of corrupting the youth by teaching them to behave in ways that their elders could not appreciate. Okay, so the defense of Socrates, the apology, recounts his trial. And in order to understand what's going on in it and why it's philosophically relevant, I need to tell you a little bit about how Athenian justice system worked at that time, which is, I know, going to make you super excited. That's why you came here. I'm sure 100% of you signed up for this class going, if only I could learn more about the justice system of 4th century BCE Athens. I could die happy. Um, so contain your excitement while I go over this. In the broad strokes, what happens is this: there's no such thing as a public a prosecutor for the state. Private individuals had to bring charges against you. They had to accuse you of something. So Plato had a couple of people, Socrates had a couple of people accusing him of these charges, and they had to um, bring him before the courts. And there were no lawyers to make the case for them. They had to stand up and make a case as to why they thought he was guilty, what he had done, and why he's guilty, and why he deserves punishment. And then Socrates gets a chance to speak in his defense and explain, his rebuttal to these charges. And there's a jury of Athenian citizens. Now, you may have heard that Athens is the birthplace of democracy. It was, technically speaking. Not everyone in Athens was able to participate in this democracy. You had to be an Athenian citizen, which means you had to own land and you had to be a dude. And I think you had to have been born there, and maybe also your parents or grandparents. I can't remember how far back it went. Um, but anyway, not everyone in Athens was a citizen, but um, but the citizens were the ones who served on the jury, sort of in the way that it's done now. Citizens are randomly selected for jury duty, even now in our society. Um, there was no judge. So there's just the people who are accusing you, and they make their case, and then you make your case, and then the citizens who are acting as the jury decide. Now that's all I'm going to tell you for now. I'm going to get into more detail in this later, but that's coming up. There were, by the way, about 500 people on the jury. That sounds like a lot, because it is. The juries were very large. It wasn't 12 people or nothing like that. This is a big thing. So 500 people randomly selected for the jury. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the accusations. Again, I encourage you to actually read this. It's very readable. Plato was a good writer, and so with a good translation, it's very readable and accessible, and it's got some really good moments in it. Socrates is a sarcastic son of a gun, and is actually pretty funny at various parts of it. I encourage you to actually read this. Um, but the short version is the accusers make their case, and then Socrates gets a chance to tell his side. Now, um, without going into the whole thing, without quoting everything that he says, uh, let me hit a few of the highlights of his testimony, or his case, if you will. One of the first things that Socrates does, almost the first thing that he does, um, is that he tries to explain why he does the things that he does. He tries to explain why he has taken on this role. Socrates referred to himself often as the gadfly of Athens. Now, if you don't know what a gadfly is, Gadfly, that's another word, a sort of old-fashioned, old-timey word for a horsefly. Now, I don't know if you've ever been around horseflies. Me personally, I've never really been around horses. I've seen them on television and at a distance at like fairs and stuff. But I don't really care to be around horses. They're very large and they have small brains, and I feel like one of them is going to kick me. So I'm not down for that. Also, they smell. What? Okay. There is some debate over whether they smell. I'm going to assume that since they do not have deodorant or perfume, that they smell. Um, anyway, the purely for the logistical difficulties of handling a stick of deodorant when you have hooves. Um, Where was I? Horseflies, right. Horseflies are big flies that bite. Horses swish their tails to keep the flies off of them sometimes. And horseflies bite. And this is what Socrates compared himself to. Socrates said he was the gadfly of Athens because he wanted to compare himself to a little stinging insect because he wanted to emphasize that what he did was aggravate Athens. He would not let them rest. He would come in and ask the hard questions and annoy people and make them think. So this is a man who intentionally compared himself to a small annoying bug, if that gives you any idea of his mindset. So that sort of sets the stage for what he's going to say about why he does the stuff he does. So, to explain his motivations, he tells a story. Now, is this story true? I don't know. The only source we have for it is Socrates himself, or rather, Plato reporting what Socrates said. So we now have a story that only Socrates told about himself, if he even told it at all, because we have a second-hand account of it from his student Plato. So, who knows? But this is the story he told. So, there was in classical Greece a person called the oracle. An oracle is another word for like a fortune teller or a seer or a psychic, someone who can answer questions for you. An oracle. Now, the oracle was practiced in this temple, and people would go to the temple and give donations to the temple, and they would be allowed to go in and see the oracle and ask a question, and the oracle would give them an answer. It was kind of weirdly enough, it was kind of a touristy thing to do. One of the things I love about classical Athens is they did have tourism. That sounds like a modern concept, but it really goes way back. They did have tourism, and in fact, some of the things we know about classical Greece are from tourist guides that had been written about, like, telling you this city, here's the things you need to see, and this is what the city is like, and things like that. They were tourist guides, and so some of the things we know about that time period and that land are from tourist guides that have survived, which is just delightful to me. But anyway, one of Socrates' friends had gone to where the oracle lived and had gone to see the oracle, because you do when you're in that city, and had asked the question, who is the wisest person in Greece? And the oracle had said, Socrates. Now, you might be asking, how the hell did the oracle know who Socrates was? Socrates was a citizen of Athens and was a fairly prosperous and well-known individual in the sort of upper class. He was a war hero from the Greco-Persian War. If you don't know what that is, take my humanities class. I talk about it a lot. He was a war hero in the Greco-Persian War. He married into money. He himself was not good with money and had several failed businesses, but he married into money, and he associated with, the upper crust. He associated with the politicians and the leaders of the city and the playwrights and the famous playwrights and all that kind of thing. Socrates was a well-known individual in Athens. He was not just some random dude. He was the kind of person you would know the name of. So the oracle says, or the guy asks, who's the wisest person? And the oracle says, Socrates. And so when the guy gets back to Athens, he tells Socrates this story kind of as isn't that weird? Isn't that kind of funny? Hey, buddy. Hey, Socrates. I asked who the wisest person was, and here's what the oracle said. The oracle said, you! How weird is that? Now, this sounds like a bit of a humble brag, Because remember, Socrates is the one telling this story to the court. Socrates is like, and the oracle said I was. And how weird. So strange. And like he even tells the story so that he's not even the one who asked. It's his friend who asked and who tells him about it. So it's kind of like, isn't that crazy? But it gets even more sort of humble brag esque. It gets even more of a humble brag when he goes into the next bit. Because Socrates, when his friend told him that, hey, Socrates, the oracle said you're the wisest person, Socrates didn't believe it. Socrates is like, well, that can't be right, because I'm not particularly wise. And so Socrates then says that when he's telling this story, he's giving kind of an origin story for why he is the way he is. And let's be clear, they put him on trial for impiety and corrupting the youth, but really they're putting him on trial for just being the way that he is. So Socrates feels a need to kind of justify and explain why he is the way that he is. So Socrates says that he figures, I'm not that wise, maybe I should figure out who the wisest person really is. So what he does is he starts talking to different groups of people, trying to find out who is really wise. If it's not me, I'm going to figure it out. Now, he goes to different groups of people in Athens, trying to figure out who is really wise. And the first group of people he goes to is going to sound super weird to us because how attitudes have changed over the past 2,000 years and change. But the first group of people he goes to are the politicians, right? And a bunch of you are laughing right now. You're like, oh, he wants to find wisdom and he goes to the politicians? Is this a joke? But no. In Athens, their assumption was that politicians, because they are involved in running the city, and they have to take part in sort of every aspect of how the city operates. The assumption was back then that if you're a politician, you have to know kind of everything, a little bit of everything, in order to be successful as a politician. You have to understand warfare and the economy and civil engineering and blah, blah, blah. You have to be able to sort of, do it all. Because running a whole city isn't about just one thing. So Socrates goes to the politicians and he asks them the kind of hard questions I was talking about earlier. He asks them questions like, if a politician is making a speech, this is going to be good for Athens. He would ask them a question like, hey, what do you mean by Athens? Which people in Athens? Or what do you mean by good? What do you mean by when you say it's going to be good for Athens? Do you mean it's going to make us rich or healthy or wise or what? Or all of those things or none of those things? And he asks the politicians these hard questions. Now, you can imagine the politicians did not want to answer these questions, and some of them didn't want to answer because they didn't want to be that honest because, they weren't super telling the truth. And some of them didn't want to answer because they hadn't really thought about it. They were saying, oh, this is going to be good for Athens. And they're like, well, what do you mean good for Athens? And they're like, I don't really know. It just seemed like the right thing to say, good for Athens, but I hadn't really thought about it that much. So he asks the politicians, and he doesn't find anyone who seems to really meet his definition of wisdom. And he's not super jazzed about that. So he moves on to talk to a different group. He says, all right, fine. If the politicians aren't wise, maybe the poets are wise. Because, again, this has to do with what they believed about poets back then. If you were a poet, you were... They thought that artistic inspiration was the kind of thing that came from the gods. That if you were a poet, that you had this sort of contact with divine inspiration and you could see things that other people couldn't see. That you were thinking on this whole, you were vibing on this whole other frequency, if you will. Um, so he goes to the poets and he'd be like, hey, poet, what is the nature of love? He asked them one of those hard questions. What is the nature of love? And the poet would be like, love is like a butterfly. You know, poetry. And he'd be like, well, okay, love is like a, I don't, I don't see how that's helpful, but you are divinely inspired, so maybe it does mean something. What do you mean by that? Tell me more. Say more words, Mr. Poet. What do you mean by love is like a butterfly? And then the poet would be like, love is like a flower. More poetry. And he's like, oh, okay. Love is like a flower. It was like a butterfly, and now it's like a flower. I don't get it. I don't get it. What does that mean? And the problem is that no matter how much he questioned the poets, all he got was more poetry. He couldn't get them to elucidate the meaning behind the poetry. And he started to wonder if there was any meaning behind the poetry. If it's just poetry, right? You know, you might think at first when you read something like love is like a butterfly. When you read that or hear it, you might think, oh, I bet there's something really profound that means that they could tell me. But when you peel away the poetry, when you peel away the layer of love is like a butterfly, that's my poet voice, by the way. When you peel away the layer of love is like a butterfly, there's nothing else there except for more poetry. And Socrates is like, well, shit. I'm sure that's exactly what he said. Well, shit. I have a PhD in philosophy. That's exactly what he said. Go forth in your other classes and tell them that I said that. Bad idea. Bad idea. They'll fire me. What are you telling them? Anyway. Bad idea. Yeah, there's just the poetry. There's nothing behind the poetry. Socrates gets frustrated. He's like, okay, well, they're not wise either. Or if they are, they can't explain it. Which is kind of the same thing. Shit. So the third group of people and the final group of people he goes to are the craftsmen. Now, why would he go to the craftsmen, like carpenters and sculptor? Well, not, yeah, carpenters and sculptors and you know, why would he go to them? Well, because the Greeks considered they held in very high regard what they called techne, 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 which is where we get our words technical and technique. Techne was a skill, the ability to do a thing. Carpentry is a techne. Sculpting is a techne. Being able to juggle is a techne. Stupid techne, but it's a techne. Sorry. I shouldn't be mean to jugglers. They have enough things against them in this world. After all, they are jugglers. Um, um, Sorry. I just like to pick on jugglers. Um, I wanted to learn to juggle at one point in my life, but I think I had self-respect. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Actually, I couldn't do it. I tried to learn to juggle. I'll be honest with you. I tried to learn to juggle, and I couldn't do it. I'm not coordinated enough. Um, And people I know who can juggle are like, "Oh, well, I can teach you. It's easy." I'm like, dude, I tried. Like, it's like people who tell me they can teach me how to roller skate. Like, oh, roller skating's easy. I'm like, maybe for you. I can't roller skate either, or ice skate, but that's pretty obvious, I guess. I mean, I can't roller skate. I sure as shit can't ice skate. Um, anyway, where was I? Jugglers. No, techne. Um, the Greeks, they thought that techne was important. And Socrates is like, well, look, techne is a kind of wisdom. It's a kind of practical wisdom. Practical wisdom was, the Greeks called it phronesis. 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 A practical wisdom. Sort of the ability to get by in life. We would call it common sense, kind of. But techne was related to practical wisdom. You can't you can't master a techne if you don't have some level of practical wisdom. Um, is sort of the thought there. That was the Greek thought. So he's like, this is a kind of wisdom. So I'm going to go to the craftspeople and I'm going to ask them the hard questions. And the problem is that when you go to a carpenter and ask him, hey, carpenter, what's the meaning of life? He's going to shrug and say, I don't know, but I can make you a set of shelves. Would you like some shelves? How about a nice dining room table? And you're like, but carpenter, what's the nature of love? What do I have free will? Am I a good person? And the carpenter's like, I don't care if you're a good person, except insofar as you pay your bill when I make you a set of shelves. Um, Basically, what Socrates discovered in talking to the craftspeople is that the craftspeople had a kind of wisdom, a practical kind of wisdom, that was related to their techne, their skill, and that's it. There's no grand metaphor of life that you're not gonna gain some deep understanding of the universe from learning how to rebuild a car engine. You're gonna get good at rebuilding your car engine, but that's it. These are two separate things. Um, so again, these people lack the wisdom that Socrates was looking for. So after exhausting all three of those categories of people and coming up empty-handed, coming up disappointed in his search for wisdom, Socrates had a revelation. He had a brainwave. The light bulb went on over his head. And he said, hey, there's a difference between me and these people. He said, the difference is not that I'm wise and that they aren't. The difference is that I know I'm not wise. The politicians think they're wise. They think they know everything. But they're not. They can run a city, maybe, but they can't answer the deep questions. The poets think they're divinely inspired, and maybe they are. They think they're giving us something deep when they say, love is like a butterfly. But it doesn't help us understand the nature of love, and they aren't getting us anywhere with this. They think they're wise, but they're not wise. And the craftspeople, the craftsmen, they know how to do their craft, and they call that wisdom. But practical wisdom isn't the end of wisdom. It's not the be-all, end-all. There are other things. There are deeper questions, and they don't have any answers for those. They think they're wise, but they're not wise in the ways that matter. Socrates, his revelation was that these people all believe they're wise, but I know I'm not. like they think they are, and I know I'm not. So who's the really wise person there? Who who is the wisest person? The person who isn't wise, who thinks that they know something and doesn't, or the person who doesn't know anything and knows that they don't know anything. And so Socrates came to accept that he maybe was the wisest person because he knew he wasn't wise. That's all there is. The beginning of wisdom is knowing that you're not wise. The beginning of your journey is to understand that you don't know shit. That's where you have to start. You have to start with, oh, I'm a dumbass. I need to figure that. I need to do something about that. Because if you don't, if you think you know everything already, what are you gonna do? You're never gonna look into things, right? If you think you know you've got all the answers, you're not gonna think about the big questions, right? You come to somebody like Socrates and say, "What is the purpose of life?" And he's gonna sit down and go, well, "Shoot, God, I don't know. What is the purpose of life? Let's figure that out, man." Somebody should really figure that out. But if you go to one of these other people and go, what is the purpose of life? They're going to give you some kind of answer, and they're going to be super confident in it, even though they haven't thought about it at all. So who's really the wise one? The one who can give you a glib answer that they haven't really thought about, or the one who sits down and goes, whew, damn, that's a hard question. Let's talk about it. And Socrates thought, hey, maybe that's the person who's really wise. So that's where Socrates starts. He gives this origin story. Why do I do the things I do? I've been accused of impiety. I've been accused of corrupting the youth. Why am I like the way I am? Here's why. The oracle said I was the wisest person. I thought that can't be right. But I discovered that wisdom isn't what I thought it was. And that maybe I am pretty wise because I know that I don't know anything. And I'm willing to look for the answers to the questions that matter. And so, after that, he starts to address the particular charges against him. And in particular, what we care about is the charge that he was corrupting the youth. Socrates says that once you understand why he's doing the things he's doing, you see that it's impossible that he's corrupting the youth. That he's not trying to lead them astray because he doesn't gain any benefit from it. There were these other people in Athens at that time called the Sophists. The Sophists would teach you how to argue. They would teach you how to win an argument, and they would charge money for this. But the Sophists weren't actually interested in the answers to big questions. They would teach you how to win any kind of argument, whether it's an argument over which play you think is better, or what kind of government we should have, or what the purpose of life is. And they didn't care what you thought the answer was. They weren't trying to find the truth. They were trying to teach you how to win. And they were charging money for it. The Sophists were profiting from what they taught. But Socrates pointed out that he wasn't profiting from what he taught. He didn't charge anybody to teach what he was teaching. He was teaching, and what he was teaching was how to think, how to ask questions that matter, how to make good arguments, how to seek after the truth, in other words. He was teaching the youths that gathered around him how to think better, how to follow up the understanding that you don't know anything. because you can't just say, "Oh, I don't know anything." Well, that sucks, and go on. You have to start by saying, "Oh, I don't know anything. How am I going to go about getting understanding? How am I going to go about finding out the answers?" Um, and so that was what he was teaching them, how to try to find the truth. And he answers the charge that he's a corrupter of the youth by saying, "Look, I'm not profiting from this. So I can't be corrupting them, because if you're gonna corrupt somebody, having someone who is corrupt living in your city and living in your society is bad. Why would I want to live around corrupt people unless there was something in it for me? Why would I want to poison the water supply unless I was getting something else out of it, right? Because that's my water supply. Why would I want to make my city worse off by corrupting people in it unless there was some profit in it uh, for me?" And he said the sophists may think that way because they literally get profit from it. They charge money to teach people how to win arguments and ignore the truth. He said, "I don't charge money. I just teach people how to find the truth. And isn't that a good thing?" So he answers the charge of corruption of the youth. Um, Now, I'm not going to talk about the charge of impiety, of not honoring the gods. That's less interesting to us. At least because the way he answers it is less interesting. So he's on trial and he makes a good case and he's very snarky and it's hilarious. And I highly recommend that you read it. Um, and the jury votes and they find him guilty. And they vote, when they find him guilty, they vote their punishment. Now the punishment they vote is death. Well, that sounds a little harsh. Why would they vote? First of all, why do they find him guilty? And why do they decide that what he's done deserves the death penalty? In order to understand this, you're going to have to understand a little more about the Athenian system of justice. So, like 500 people in the jury. The vote was pretty close, so he clearly convinced some people. The vote was pretty close. But they still found him guilty, and they still voted the death penalty, and here's why. In our system of justice, here in modern-day United States, in our system of justice, I'm sure if you've watched Law and Order, you know that there's something called a plea bargain. Before the trial, like let's say someone's charging you with murder one. You're charged with first-degree murder. If we go to trial and you lose, you'll get the death penalty. That sucks. But before it goes to trial, before we know if they're going to find you guilty or not, you could admit to doing something not quite as serious, get a lesser punishment, and save everybody the trouble of a trial. That's called a plea bargain, where you say, all right, the bargain part of it is this. You say, all right, I don't think I committed murder one. You're charging me with murder one, and I say I'm innocent of that. But I might be willing to acknowledge maybe that I did a manslaughter, right? That I'm guilty of manslaughter. I might be willing to acknowledge that. But you got to guarantee me a lesser penalty. You gotta guarantee me that I'm not going to get the death penalty or something crazy like that. I'm willing to admit to manslaughter and maybe serve, like, I don't know, 8 to 12 years. How about that? Now, why would a prosecutor accept this? Well, the reasons why they would accept it, they got two big reasons. Well, three. The first big reason is that maybe they don't, a trial is a risk. Even if they feel like they have a really good case, um, they're never perfect, and maybe if the case has some weak points in it, maybe they're worried that if they take this to trial, they might lose. And the guy they're accusing might be found innocent, and then, that's not good as far as the prosecutor is concerned, because the prosecutor really thinks the person did something bad, or otherwise they wouldn't have brought the charges. And so, from the prosecutor's perspective, losing the trial is a miscarriage of justice. So, they might want to kind of, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush kind of thing. They might want to accept the plea bargain, charge this person with a lesser crime like manslaughter, where they only serve 8 to 12 years, and skip the trial because that way it's a guarantee. At least some justice is done. So that's one reason a prosecutor might accept a plea bargain. Another reason is because a trial is a public expense. These things aren't funded by bake sales. Your tax dollars are paying for all the people who work in the courtroom and their time and holding this person in jail and transporting this person to and from court, and all that's all your tax dollars. And furthermore, there's a lot of people waiting for trial for stuff. Taking a plea bargain reduces the burden on the system and on the taxpayer. It moves a case through the courts quickly. It cuts through all the bullshit and gets this right down to the end of the process, and this guy goes to jail and we're done. And we don't have to spend, 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 4 months or however long having a trial. Boom, boom, boom. We're done. Guy goes to jail. Justice is served at least a little bit. Next case. But the third reason, and the most important for our purposes, that a prosecutor might want to accept a plea bargain is that part of every plea bargain, one of the conditions of every plea bargain, is that the person who is pleading guilty to this lesser charge, this person has to actually plead guilty. In other words, they have to stand up in court and say what they did and say that they did it. Yes, I am guilty of manslaughter. These are the things I did, and I deserve this punishment. This is why I did a bad. That matters. It's an abstract way that it matters, but it does matter. In a lot of cases, it might be more fair. It might be better for the victims of the crime or the families of the victims of the crime to get that kind of closure. Let's say the person pleads not guilty to first-degree murder. You go to court, first-degree murder is the charge. The person says, I didn't do that. And there's a whole trial, and you lay out the evidence, and you lose the case. They're found not guilty. Well, that's bad. Justice is not being served from the perspective of the prosecutor. Maybe they aren't guilty, maybe they are, but as far as we'll assume for our purposes, for the example, that the person really did do it, but they're just not found guilty at trial. The families of the victims of this horrendous crime, that's another thing they have to suffer. But even if, hypothetically, even if the person is found guilty, let's say they pleaded not guilty and they're found guilty at trial, remember, their position the person on trial, their position the whole time has been, I didn't do that. Just because a trial finds them guilty, they're not required to say, you got me. I lost. They're not required to do that. They can spend the rest of their lives saying, I didn't do it, I'm innocent, I don't know anything you're talking about. Yes, the families of the victims, the community, if you will, can be satisfied that this person was found guilty and punished, but they will never get the satisfaction, the closure of the person admitting their guilt in that case. With a plea bargain, even though the punishment is lesser, even though they're not being punished as much, something socially important, something of value to the community and to the victims or the families of the victims happens, which is that the person admits their crime. That they actually have to come through with it and say, yeah, I did it. That matters. That's not just an intangible benefit to accepting a plea bargain. So, why am I explaining all this? Okay, here's why. In Athens, in this period, they had something kind of like a plea bargain, but not exactly. What they did was, once they voted, if they found you guilty, you got to make a counteroffer on punishment. So let's imagine you've been found guilty of something and you are fined $10,000. I mean, it wouldn't have been dollars. This is classical Greece. So it would have been probably sesterces. Or, sesterces? Yeah. I think it was sesterces. I'm not going to Google it. Anyway, you're fined $10,000. You can then, you're already found guilty. You've already been found guilty. You can then come back with your counteroffer and you say, hey, drachma? Was it drachma that what's sesterces? I can't make it. I bet it is.
Because I think I remember them saying that.
It is. It's a Roman coin. Damn it. Okay. Drachma. 10,000 drachma. Sesterces are Roman. I'm very embarrassed by this. You can't imagine how humiliating it is for me to mix those up. Just the... How will I ever show my face? Woe is me. Fine 10,000 drachma. You come back with a counteroffer and you can say, well, alright, I don't think what I did was 10,000 drachma worth of bad. But what if I admit to it? If I say, yeah, okay, what I did was bad. If I acknowledge my guilt and pay $7,500. Why would any jury accept this? Well, as I said, there is a social value to having the person who has been accused. There is a social value to that person acknowledging their guilt. If you're found guilty and fined 10,000 sesterces, 10,000 drachma. If you're found guilty and fined $10,000, it's all dollars. From here on out. If you're fined $10,000 and you don't make this counteroffer, you may have to pay the fine, but you can go around from then on saying, I didn't do anything wrong. And they're like, didn't they find you guilty? It's like, yeah, it was bullshit. I didn't do anything wrong. Right? You can say that. But if you make the counteroffer and say, okay, my bad, what I did was wrong, and I'll pay $7,500, you're still on the hook for $7,500. You have to pay that. But you have admitted what you did was wrong. You have said, hey, here's the punishment I deserve. Because that's how they framed it. They would say, here's what you deserve to be fined $10,000. And you would say, I only think I deserve to be fined $7,500. You're still admitting that you deserve to be fined. You see what I mean? You're still admitting that you did something wrong enough to deserve a punishment. Not as big a punishment as they thought, but a punishment. In front of the entire city, you have admitted you were wrong and you deserve punishment. There's a value to that. There's a social value to that. Why would the jury that has already found you guilty accept one of these counteroffers? Well, in order to get you to admit you were wrong, which is going to have an impact down the road. Okay, so why death? The problem with that kind of system, which I don't think the Athenians apprehended, the problem with that kind of system is that it creates what economists call a perverse incentive. In other words, the way the system is set up, even if you set it up with the intention that the jury imposes a reasonable punishment and then the accused comes back with a slightly lesser punishment as a counteroffer, the way it's actually going to play out is that the juries selected are going to quickly figure out that if you sentence someone to death, they'll offer anything to get out of that. In other words, finding someone guilty and then making the sentence death, regardless of what it is, means that they are going to be super eager to say, no, it was my fault, it was my bad, I did it, I did what you're saying, and here's my counteroffer. Because who wouldn't admit that they were wrong, even if they don't think they are? Who wouldn't admit that they were wrong to avoid death? So the system didn't work perfectly, is what I'm saying. There were some problems. They find Socrates guilty. They sentence him to death. Now here comes the crucial moment. Socrates gets to make his counteroffer. Gesundheit. Morgan sneeze. Sorry. Socrates gets to make his counteroffer. Did they believe that he deserved death, or did they just want him to accept that he was wrong? I don't know. In this case, there would be a very distinct social value to Socrates admitting he was wrong. Because remember, Socrates had a loyal group of devoted admirers who wanted to be just like him. They wanted to find the truth. They wanted to ask the hard questions. One gadfly in Athens was bad enough. One person harassing the authorities with tough questions was bad enough. How bad would it be if all these little admirers of Socrates grew up to be just like him and started asking the hard questions? Oh, God. Sounds terrible. But if Socrates stands before the court, stands before the entire city, and says, what I did was wrong, I should not have been behaving the way that I behaved, what happens to his followers? I mean, his credibility is tanked. If he comes out and says, yeah, I shouldn't have done any of that. I shouldn't have asked the hard questions. I shouldn't have put those guys on the spot. I shouldn't be looking for truth. What happens to his followers? What happens to the movement that he started? Did they really want him dead? Or did they just want to get him to say, I was wrong? Maybe they, yeah, I don't know. That's a hard question. I kind of feel like maybe they just wanted him to say he was wrong. And, accept a lesser punishment. Say, here's what I deserve. I deserve to, I don't know, I deserve to be exiled from the city. Or I deserve to pay a huge fine. Or I deserve to be publicly humiliated. Or whatever. Maybe they just wanted to destroy his credibility. That they didn't want to kill the man, they wanted to destroy the man. If that makes any sense. I don't know. I don't have a window into the minds of the jury. But it really feels like they would have gotten more out of that. That would have been a better outcome for them. Because they could put a stop to this whole bullshit right then and there. Socrates was an old man. And he said he didn't fear death because he was old and he was already on the edge of it anyway. But when he gets a chance to make his counteroffer, he still does something that takes such an enormous amount of chutzpah. I mean, this guy had moxie. He had cojones. In a way, I can't believe it. When he gets a chance to make his counteroffer, they say, Socrates, we find you guilty, and we think that for what you've done, for what we have found you guilty of doing, you deserve death. What do you think you deserve? He said, oh, what do I deserve? What do I deserve for practicing philosophy? What do I deserve for searching for the truth? What do I deserve for teaching other people how to ask the hard questions and search for the truth? Here's what I deserve. I deserve to be feasted for life. In other words, I deserve to be given free food on the city's expense for the rest of my life. Why free food? Well, free food for life was one of the rewards offered by Athens to Athenian citizens who won at the Olympics. We just had the Olympics, the modern Olympics. We just had them. So they're right on my mind. The classical Olympics have been going on for hundreds of years at that point. And Athens, when a citizen of Athens went to the Olympics and won, one of the many things they got as a reward was they could go down to the public forum and ask for food and be given food for the rest of their lives. They didn't have to pay for any meals. It would be like, imagine if everyone who won a medal for the U.S. got like a card that they could present at any McDonald's and get free food. Get like a Happy Meal or something. Or a combo number one. Whatever. I don't remember what the combo number one is. I don't know if I'd want that. Like, imagine that. That's kind of the deal they had going on. Athens gave free food for life to its Olympic champions. And that's what Socrates said he deserved. In other words, what Socrates is saying is that for practicing philosophy and teaching other people to practice philosophy, he deserves to be treated like a damned Olympic champion. He deserves to be honored. He deserves to be given glory. He deserves to have the whole city look up to him and hoist him on their shoulders, and treat him like a hero. And that was the counteroffer he made. They're like, we think you deserve death. What do you think you deserve? And he says, treat me like a champion that I am, and we'll call it good. Holy hell! That's bonkers! That's like if you were on trial today in the United States, and they're like, we think you did a bad thing, and we think you committed fraud, and we're gonna put you in jail. If we convict you, we're gonna put you in jail for 10 years. Come back at me. What's your counteroffer? And you say, my counteroffer? My counteroffer is you pay me $1 million. They're not going to accept that. Spoiler alert, that's not going to happen. So basically what happens then is after Socrates makes his counteroffer, the jury has to re-vote whether they will accept the counteroffer. And what's amazing is it was a close vote. There were some people that were actually voting to accept that were like, you know what? This old dude, I gotta hand it to him. Let's just give him what he wants. I can't in good conscience put this guy to death. And that's another thing that makes me think maybe they didn't actually want him dead. They just wanted him to admit he was wrong. Because when it came down to it, when it came right down to the crunch time, and they had to vote, do we actually put him to death, or do we accept his ridiculous counteroffer? A lot of them actually voted, let's just give him the free food and have done with it. But they didn't. It was a close vote, but they still voted to put him to death. And what happened then? Well, no surprise, they executed him. They gave him a little time to talk to his followers and everything and put his affairs in order and say goodbye. And then they gave him poison to drink, and he drank poison, hemlock, and that was that. So Socrates died for philosophy. And he was okay with it. He said, hey man, the law is the law. His followers are like, isn't this unjust? And he said, maybe, but the law is the law. I've lived under the laws of Athens my whole life. I'm not about to start breaking them now. They wanted to smuggle him out of the city. And he's like, no. They found me guilty. That's the law. I'm going to drink poison and die. Because I'm a man of principle. They found him guilty of practicing philosophy, and he said, if that's what I'm guilty of, and if the penalty for practicing philosophy is death, kill me. Whew. Why do we care? What do we learn from the trial of Socrates? I think a lot of people say that they wouldn't have the that they wouldn't have the stuff, if you will, the guts. That they wouldn't have the guts to do what he did. And I think that's reasonable. That's a reasonable response. We're talking death here. Would you die for your principles? I know it sounds, it's heroic, and maybe we think we're supposed to say yes, but, we're all human. None of us want to die. I don't think that there's anything wrong with you if you say, I'd like to think I would die for my principles, but in practice, I don't know if I would. I don't think you have anything to be ashamed of if you say that. On the other hand, don't sell yourself short. Don't underestimate yourself. Because if you remember from the previous videos, philosophy isn't just, I'm not asking you to die for, I'm not asking you to die for colonial history. This is different. This is a different kind of thing. I'm not asking you to die for Calculus 2. I'm not asking if you would die for your anatomy and physiology class. Philosophy is about delving into the big questions. The ones that define us as humans. The ones that matter. When you ask, what is the point of my life? When you ask, am I a good person? When you ask, how can I be a better partner or friend? When you lay awake at night, wondering what it all means, you're doing philosophy. So if I ask you, would you be willing to die for philosophy? What I'm really asking you, would you be willing to live without it? Would you be willing to live if you could somehow be prevented from ever asking those questions? If they could stop you from asking, what does it mean to be free? What is the best form of government? Who are we and what do we value? What matters to us? Why is family important? What can I do to make the world a better place? Imagine a world where you couldn't ask those questions. Where you were prevented from them. Where you would be punished if you did ask those questions. And think about that and think about whether you would want to live in that world. Because if the answer is no, if you can say, I don't want to live in that world, the corollary of that is maybe I would be willing to die rather than stop doing philosophy. If I don't want to live in a world without philosophy, I'm kind of saying I am willing to die for philosophy. Do we have the guts? Do we have the courage of our convictions? Do we have the guts to die for principle? I don't know. I don't want to make myself sound like a hero or something. I don't want you to feel like you're under pressure to sound go, oh yeah, I die for my principles or whatever. It sounds like bragging at that point. But I don't know if I could live in that world. And not just because I got a PhD in philosophy and I don't want to be out of a job. I don't want to live in a world where the core elements of the human experience are stripped away. Where what it means to be a person is taken from me. I don't want to live in that world. So if I was faced with the choice of living in that world or dying, I don't know, maybe I'd say die. Because what would be the point of staying alive? I don't know. It's something to think about. It's something that bears thinking about. And that's why we're still talking about this trial 2,400 years later and change. That's why we're still talking about it. The Athenian justice system utterly failed in what it was trying to do. If they were trying to silence Socrates, if they were trying to nip this movement in the bud and stop whatever was happening, boy, did they beef it. Uh, 2,400 years later, we still know who Socrates is. We still know about his trial and why he was killed and what he was doing and why he was willing to die. I'd say he won. In the bigger picture, I'd say he won. He might have lost the trial, technically speaking, but he didn't lose the argument. Okay, so the defense of Socrates, aka the apology. Read it if you haven't read it. Ideally, you should be coming to these videos already having read the reading. I'm not stupid. I know some of you have watched the videos first, or maybe instead. Don't do that with this one. Go read it. Go read it and think about it. Think about what you'd be willing to die for, and think about the kinds of questions that you would no longer be able to ask if you agreed to live without philosophy. Alright, have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video.